to all of you. Am I audible to all of you? Yeah, okay. Good evening, India. Good morning, America. Good afternoon, Europe and other places. A very, very warm welcome to you all. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, friends, it's a real pleasure and honor for me to see so many people from different time zones and geographies to gather online for this very important webinar on the future trajectory of India-United States relations after the US elections. We were planning to call it India-US relations under Joe Biden, but in retrospect, I think we made the right choice by rechristening it in general terms. Going by the number of registrations received, we have several ambassadors and well-known strategic names in the audience. My special greetings to all of you. We are live streaming this webinar on multiple platforms, Facebook Live, YouTube, and Twitter. If any of you have difficulty in catching it on any one platform, please switch on. You should be able to access it. My name is Manish Chand. I am founder, CEO of India Rights Network and the Global Insights India. India Rights Network is an emerging think tank and a media publishing organization focused on international affairs. We also publish a magazine journal called India and the World, which has carved a niche among the strategic community. The Global Insights India is a research arm of India Rights Network, and it focuses on a diverse set of issues relating to foreign policy, with special focus on Indo-Pacific, China, and emerging powers. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, now let me welcome our very prominent speakers. They include some of the most iconic names in the field, interlinked areas of diplomacy, strategic thinking, business, and academia. It's a special honor to host them at this webinar. Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, and India's former ambassador to France, Russia, Turkey, and Egypt. Ambassador Meera Sankar, who was listed as one of the speakers, she's stuck with some meeting, but will join later. She is India's former ambassador to US and Germany. Mr. Mukesh Aghi, President and CEO, US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Michael Kugelman, Deputy Director, Asia Program, the Wilson Center, United States. He's joining us from New York, Michael. Yeah. Harinder Sekhon, Strategic Analyst and Author. I will introduce them in greater detail when I ask them to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, the US elections 2020 have turned out to be a real cliffhanger with no official results declared even 3 days after the election, after the votes have been polled. Going by latest vote count updates, it seems Joe Biden is heading to the White House. President Trump has threatened legal action, which means it could take days and weeks before the next president of the United States is officially certified and anointed. The world is watching with bated breath how this messy situation will eventually pan out. And at the end of it all, who will be the next United States president? In a sense, it looks like America is not only electing its own president, but the world is electing its next leader. It is clear that all major nations have high stakes in the outcome of the 2020 elections. Insofar as India is concerned, there is a sense of anticipation, but there is no visible anxiety about whether it will be Joe Biden or Donald Trump. India's confidence and comfort level stems from the robust bipartisan consensus for stronger India-US relations that have been cemented over the years. The last 2 decades in particular have reinforced this bipartisan consensus, with each occupant of the White House raising the bar. Moreover, Joe Biden has a long-standing record of promoting India-US partnership, first as chairperson of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and as vice president under the Obama administration. As SFRC chair, Biden played an important role in mobilizing Democratic Party's support for the nuclear deal. In one of his campaign speeches, he wrote many years ago, not in campaign speeches, he wrote it quite some time back. My dream is that in 2020, the two closest nations in the world will be India and the United States. Diplomats and experts point out that the election of Biden would be a big boost for Indian American community, especially as a running mate will become the first Indian American to become the vice president of the most powerful nation on earth. Now, briefly coming to the overarching theme of today's webinar. In the last few weeks, there have been intense discussions on this subject, but this webinar seeks to map the potential trajectory of this crucial partnership, famously described by President Obama as the defining partnership of the 21st century in specific detail, and in terms of potential agenda vis-a-vis India. Thematically, the webinar will explore how the Biden presidency will help bring greater strategic and ideational convergence between the world's two largest democracies amid the ongoing pandemic and shifting power relations between the United States and China. In fact, China is bound to be the elephant in the room whenever India-US relations are discussed, and this has been the trend for so many years. So in this webinar, we will be focusing a great deal on whether the Biden administration will change its approach and strategy vis-a-vis China. To sum up the webinar, we'll take a searching look at how the next US administration will impact India's core national interests in the economic and strategic arena. Surely Joe Biden will probably coin his own idiom and pet phrase, but what Indians would be interested in is knowing whether making America great and making India great can dovetail without friction under the new US administration. Going beyond hard geopolitical calculations, the India and the United States will also have to explore how our people can connect closer at the level of hearts and minds. Pandemic has brought public health to the forefront of diplomatic outreach. It will be watched closely how the two engaged democracies can enhance the canvas of their cooperation to restore physical and economic health in these pandemic-stricken times. I would like to close my opening remarks with these two lines from the iconic American poet Walt Whitman. These lines were quoted by Prime Minister Modi during his stirring speech to the US Congress in 2016. The orchestra have sufficiently tuned their instrument, the baton has given the signal. And to that, if I may add, there is a new symphony in play, said Modi to thunderous applause. Let's now turn to our speakers to figure out what kind of new symphony is possible between India and the United States under the new American president. Now I turn to our guests. To begin with, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal. Let me introduce him in somewhat greater detail. Ambassador Sibal is a former Foreign Secretary of India and well-known commentator on foreign policy issues. He also served as India's ambassador to Turkey, Egypt, France, and Russia. In 2017, he was conferred the Padma Shri Award by the President of India. He is the first Grand Doctor of Philosophy in India. He received the title of full professor from the European Academy of Informatization and the World Distributed University. And not many know, but Kanwal Sibal is also a very accomplished poet. And when he is weary of a diplomatic rigmarole, he turns to writing verses. Over to Ambassador Sibal. Ambassador Sibal, the American election, the outcome is being watched closely all over the world. We don't know how it's going to pan out as of now, but the trends clearly suggest it will be Joe Biden. Now, do you think India will move up the foreign policy calculus of the prospective Biden presidency? What are the two major changes in India's foreign policy do you envisage under the Biden presidency that will impact India's vital interest, will benefit India? That's question number one. And maybe you'd like to also address that regardless of what the world thinks of him, Trump, some say, has been very good to India. For example, Trump's support for India during the India-China standoff was unequivocal. Can we expect Biden to be supportive of India vis-a-vis China? Each speaker gets around 6 minutes or so because we plan to have an animated discussion after the first round. So please address these specific questions and resist your, talent for eloquence. This is for everybody. Over to Ambassador Sybil.
In the result of the US election, especially those countries which now have problems with the United States, serious problems with the United States. Now, I think India can be reasonably comfortable with whatever the result of this election. We've not been controversial in terms of US foreign policy. In fact, the relationship has improved over the years, right from the end of the Clinton administration to the Bush administration to the Obama administration and to the Trump administration. That doesn't mean that there haven't been issues and problems, but they have always been at the manageable level, and they have not arrested the momentum of improved ties. This is the reality on the ground. You've talked about the bipartisan consensus. That has been a reality in terms of relationship with the United States, because India's rise does not cause concern in the United States like China's rise. India is not aiming to replace the United States by 2049 as the world's foremost power. We've not been involved in stealing technologies or violating IPRs or making sure that we take the lead in those technologies which will determine which country will be the leading economic, political, and military power. China has been doing that in terms of getting control over critical supply chains, critical raw materials, and of course, its Belt and Road Initiative is a huge project under the control of a single government. It's not a multilateral project. And the whole idea of China, apart from getting access to raw materials, is to create constituencies in various countries so that when it projects its power, it has a base on which to, base of support in the international system, in the UN system, and they've done rather well in the UN system. So there's a challenge to US power. India is not in that category, in that league. And there are other things which unite us and US, which China does not have. We don't have an authoritarian system. We don't have state-owned enterprises that are subsidized by the government. You can't make a distinction between the private sector and the public sector. We're not creating champions in specific areas which will dominate sections of the world economy. We are not expanding our navy in an unprecedented way, because the expansion of the Chinese navy is almost unprecedented in the annals of history. We are not occupying islands, reclaiming islands, and extending our sovereignty claims all over the world. Even though we are a big country, we don't have a hunger for more territory, which China has. And I'm not talking about now democracy and the values we share, etc., etc. So there is a solid basis to these ties. And then, if you look at the trajectory of the Indian economy in the years ahead, of course, all the economies in the world have suffered setbacks because of COVID, and India too has suffered a setback. And some of our goals may not be achieved in the timeframes that we had in mind. But the fact that we are already the fifth largest economy and will, in the years to come, improve that ranking, maybe become the third largest, which means that next to China, we'll be one of the biggest markets which have not fully, the potential of which has not been fully exploited by the rest of the world. And with our manpower and our human potential, our expertise in certain key industries of the future, like the IT industry, makes us a very valuable partner. And finally, in terms of the China challenge, it's connected to that. If the United States has to face up to China, then which is the country in Asia, since we all agree that political and economic power has shifted from the transatlantic region to the Asia Pacific region, which is the country in this region which can stand up to China? Japan can't, South Korea can't, ASEAN can't, India can. And there is a community of interest between India and United States, which will play out. That doesn't necessarily mean either India or United States is seeking a conflict with China. It is simply that China's ambitions have to be curbed. Finally, with regard to Trump, yes, he's been very good to India, but so was George Bush very good to India. So was Obama in his second term very good to India. In fact, he visited India twice. And in fact, some of the foundations of what we are doing today were laid in Obama's time, whether it was a joint strategic vision for the Asia Pacific and Indian Ocean regions, whether Ash Carter building the base for defense ties through the TGII, and beginning the negotiations for these foundational agreements, which were not achieved during his time. But the fact is that he set the course to the finalization of these agreements, and progressively Trump has built on the legacy that was left by the previous presidents, especially Bush and Obama. And that's why we can say he was very good to India, in inverted commas, but he also was very unpredictable, impulsive, said things in public which were embarrassing, but he followed it because the larger framework of the relationship was very good. Even on sensitive subjects like Kashmir, he was offering mediation, which the previous presidents were not, and he was saying unkind things about India here and there, even about Modi occasionally talking and castigating us as the tariff king and what have you. But this was Trump's style. And I think, given the fact that we managed to establish an equation with him, one can say that Trump was kinder to us than to his allies, whether in Europe or Japan or South Korea. Biden will be equally supportive for the reasons you mentioned. He's a lot of experience of dealing with India as vice president of Obama. He visited India in 2013. He has some ambitions in terms of trade with India. He set a target in 2013 of $500 billion. It won't be easily achievable, but yes, in his vision, India it will be a solid economic partner in the future. On climate change, he's obsessed with climate change, if I can use the word, unlike Trump. This will be an issue on which we would have more engagement and more discussions, and it'll go into renewable energy and clean technologies and everything else. In terms of Indo-Pacific and everything else, as I said, he would have every reason, or the Quad, every reason to build on what has been achieved. And on the military side, I'm 100% confident that he will exploit to the hilt at the base of the defense relationship that has been built, and the enormous increase in India's procurement from the United States, reaching almost $18 to $20 billion. And the defense ties is a very vital arm of US foreign policy. And on that, Biden will make the best effort possible to keep that relationship to develop as much as possible. So on the whole, I would say that we can talk a little later about some of the issues that may come up on the human rights issue and CAA and treatment of minorities and intolerance and this and that. I have certain views on that. But let me end here for the moment. And when we come to those issues, I'll give you my thinking. You should unmute yourself.
Thank you, Ambassador Simbal, for that very trenchant analysis of some of the areas where probably our partnership will grow further and some possible constraints. Welcome to Ambassador Meera Sankar. We'll come back to you. You just joined in. I'm glad you could find time to do so. I now turn to Mr. Mukesh Aghi. Following from what Ambassador Sibbal was saying about the economic partnership, that he expects that under Biden, India will be a solid economic partner. Also, he said that, he'll build on that sturdy base, the defense side, take it to the next level. My question to you is, uh, when Trump, one of the things, the unfinished agenda taking it forward, which is about the India-US trade deal. For all this bonhomie, all this famous Modi-Trump hugs and all that, we couldn't get this done. And it was all the time rumored that we are doing it, speculated that we are close to at least a limited trade deal, which eventually did not happen. My question to you, sir, is this, that how do you see the realistic prospects? How soon do you think under Biden, well, if he takes charge in January going forward, we can have this long discussed, long negotiated trade deal finally? Also, we are expecting a change in the negotiating style, a change in the diplomatic idiom and style from the famously transactional Donald Trump to a probably more accommodating Joe Biden. Do you expect the Biden administration will be more accommodating in some of our concerns on the trade front? Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Manish. When we look at the current scenario where you have a Senate which will be controlled by the Republicans, and you have a House which is controlled by the Democrat, and Biden in the White House, there is a certain sense of balance between the legislative and the executive itself. But more important to understand is people are saying that will the Republicans stop Biden's agenda because you have to go through both houses in a lot of these issues to get approval. I think a lot of people don't realize that Mitch McConnell, the Speaker, obviously leader of the Senate, has a better relationship with Biden than he had with Trump itself. They go way, way back, especially when Biden was a senator, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and they worked together in many, many other projects. So that's one aspect of the scenario because it does have impact on the trade deal. The second factor you have to understand, geopolitically, as China gets more aggressive, India becomes a strategic partner for the US more and more. In fact, in the last 2 years, there are more joint exercises conducted between India and the US than any other country in the world itself. So the geopolitical alignment does percolate down into the economic alignment. And the reason I say that today, the trade between India and the US is around $150 billion. And because of COVID, it slowed down, but we expect the momentum to pick up. But I think more important, you have to understand that while President Trump had pulled off GSP from India, this is giving a special concessions to a small exporter. By pulling the GSP, the export of those products did not slow down. They still grew the fastest than the normal trade between the two countries. So I think while Trump was not able to do a trade deal and even pull the GSP down, I strongly believe that the team Biden presidency will take a very different approach to India on the trade side. Number one, that means they're going to focus just only on the trade side, but also focus on the environment. They're going to focus on the TPP itself and build a consensus. And I also strongly believe that Biden team will be much more accommodating to India, keeping in the bigger geopolitical partnership itself. So how soon will that happen? I think you have to understand the agenda is going to be health, number one. Get the COVID crisis in some capacity somewhere under control. Because today we had over 121,000 people infected by COVID. And so that'll be a priority. And I think that's where India also can play a very strong role because of its capacity on the drug side. The second factor will be economic, to make sure that the jobs are back and the stimulus package is up. And so I think the course of action of definition of COVID itself. So if you get COVID under control, you will get the economy going. And once you get the economy going, I strongly believe that you'll see the trade deal coming in the next 12 to 24 months between India and the USA. Thank you. You're on mute.
We'll come to you with more questions. Thank you very much for that very pithy presentation. I apologize, I forgot to introduce Dr. Agi. For those who do not know him, he's the President and Chief Executive of very influential, powerful India-US Business Lobby, US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Dr. Agi has extensive experience working with business and government leaders in the US and India to promote trade and strengthen trade ties between the two countries. Previously, Dr. Agi served as Chief Executive and member of the board at L&T Infotech, where he expanded the business on a global level. Now I turn to Ambassador Meera Shankar. I'm glad that she has been able to wind up a previous engagement and join us for this conversation. Meera Shankar served as India's ambassador to the United States from 2009 to 2011. She was India's second female ambassador to the United States of America, Vijaya Lakshmi Nehru Pandit being the first. She studied at St. Mary's Convent in Nainital and joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1973. She served as director in the Prime Minister's office from 1985 to 1991 and in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry from 1991 to 1995. Prior to, she served as India's ambassador to Germany, which is among her more strategic and key assignments. Now we turn to Ambassador Meera Shankar. Madam Ambassador, you are looking at the future trajectory. During his address to the Indian Parliament in 2010, American President Barack Obama supported India's aspiration for a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. Mm-hmm. President Trump has also reiterated the support, and most recently, the US underlined its support for India's UNSC candidacy at the 2+2 talks. Do you see Joe Biden? Do you think Joe Biden will be more supportive of India's global aspirations? What I have on my mind is that this whole project of United States of America supporting India's rise, which was a calculated strategic decision during the George Bush presidency and was being carried forward by his successors. Do you see Joe Biden being more forthcoming, not just UN Security Council, but other key institutions of global governance architecture, like the NSG, for example?
Look, firstly, let me underline that there is a strong bipartisan consensus in the US to build the relationship with India. And this is driven by the increasing strategic convergence between the two countries in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, if you look at Joe Biden's stance, it's less transactional or America first. President Trump's stance was America first, hire American, buy American. Now, Joe Biden's stance is more internationalist. Even with regard to China, he says he will seek to build an international coalition with allies and partners to put pressure on China to prevent intellectual property theft rather than going down a unilateral route. And there are many other international issues to which he has given priority, such as climate change, and therefore seeking partners and democratic values, therefore seeking international partners who can contribute to the fulfillment of these objectives would be very much Biden's approach. So as far as the UN Security Council is concerned, yes, President Obama did make a departure from earlier US policy, which had not supported India's candidature for a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. But unfortunately, the way the processes and procedures for change in the UN Security Council membership are today, we would need, any of the Security Council permanent members could actually block our candidature. So we are not there yet because China doesn't support it. And also in the UN General Assembly, there is no consensus on whether to expand the council only in the non-permanent category or to expand it in the permanent category, and what to do with the veto. So the present stalemate, in a sense, continues. The same holds true with regard to the NSG, where again, President Obama was the first to support India's entry into the NSG, MTCR, Australia group, and so on. And we have been successful in joining the other groups. But in the NSG, China has objected and made it an issue that, either the country joining should be a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or there should be norms worked out which apply to all other countries, meaning Pakistan, rather than making an exception for any single country. And that is not acceptable to the bulk of the NSG membership. So again, we are in a stalemate, and we would require to work with both China and the US if we want to enter. But broadly speaking, I would expect that the Biden administration will be sympathetic to India's entry or to getting a larger presence in international institutions. We've seen, many Indian economists becoming chief economic advisors in the IMF and the World Bank, for instance. Now, we need to carry this forward. And I think Biden would be supportive. If you look at his priorities in the foreign policy realm, he said he will rejoin Paris almost immediately after being elected, and he will work for a more ambitious agenda than Paris. He himself has pledged, as part of his agenda, to make the US carbon emissions free by 2050, and the electricity sector in the US carbon emissions free by 2035. So you could expect that this is one area where there will be efforts to look at what can be done in terms of Paris Plus. Now, for India, I think we are doing quite a lot in the renewable sphere. And we have made commitments in Paris, which will also be difficult actually to fulfill. But with the use of more renewable energy, we are on a path to that. Maybe there can be additional commitments by our companies. Some of our companies are taking on tighter commitments. For instance, ITC, they say that they are not only carbon emission neutral, they are net positive. Because of what they do, they are net water positive, they are net energy. So there are many companies which might be willing to take on additional commitments. The second thing which would be of interest to us would be Iran, where Biden has said that he will rejoin the Iran nuclear agreement if the IAEA certifies that Iran is in compliance with its obligations under the agreement. Now, Iran has, in a calibrated manner, gone back on some of those obligations. So there would need to be some negotiations to bring it around in return for easing of sanctions. And that is something which the Biden administration will do. But what I do expect is that they will not pursue sanctions against other countries who have dealings with Iran. And I hope that they do not pursue sanctions against other countries which have dealings with Russia. The third area where Biden marks a departure from the Trump administration is in his pledge to resume arms reduction, strategic arms reduction negotiations with Russia. You've had, Trump walk out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, of START, not continue START, and probably Biden will resume this. With regard to China, his position has been a little more ambiguous, where he has not really said what he will do, except to say that he won't act unilaterally, but will work with other allies and partners to put pressure on China to change its approach. With regard to Russia, he has called it an adversary. So I would hope, actually, because if you look at the US, the real challenge is going to be China, because Russia doesn't have the economic and technological capabilities to actually sustain a major challenge against the US. It has the defense and strategic capabilities, but the challenge really is going to be China. So I would hope that the US does not foreclose the possibility of looking at, revisiting the kind of very adversarial relationship that has built up with Russia in recent years, in a kind of Nixonian endeavor to tilt the triangle in the relationship with China.
Thank you so much. This is probably the last time I do. Thank you so much for that very penetrating analysis and very relevant thing about there is a lot of ambiguity about how the new administration will deal with the China threat, with Iran and the rest. We now turn to Michael Kugelman. To introduce him briefly, he is the Deputy Director of the Asia Program and Senior Associate for South Asia at the Wilson Center, a very influential American think tank. And he's a leading specialist on Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan, and their relations with the United States of America. The editor and co-editor of 11 books. He's written for some iconic publications, the New York Times, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, etc., on a diverse range of subjects. Michael, to you, my question is, basically taking the argument on China forward, that we can only speculate that what will be Joe Biden's foreign policy vis-a-vis China. But at the same time, just to give an example, what I mean is that America has to work out some sort of modus vivendi. As in India's case, we have been trying to figure out that to coexist, and the adversarial relationship with so much bitterness between, China and the United States, especially after the start of the trade war, how do you see this going forward? And I recall now the famous, the flamboyant remarks made by President Trump that China is ripping us left, right, and center. We should not give them state dinners, but take them to McDonald's. You think we'll have a president who's interested in kind of coexisting with China, and in what ways?
Well, thank you very much, Manish. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this discussion. It's quite an honor to be on a panel with such a distinguished group of individuals. So it's really great to be here. I really agree with what others have said to this point. I really side with everything we've heard. And in terms of the China issue, I think it's important to make a few initial points about how the U.S. sees China at this point. Indeed, US-China relationship became increasingly toxic and hostile during the last few years of the Trump administration. It's important to remember that at one point, Trump was referring to Xi Jinping as a friend. And I think that there was a point in time when he viewed China as a potentially useful interlocutor or facilitator of Trump's efforts to get talks going with North Korea. But things changed. That, of course, didn't work out well. And then the coronavirus pandemic came about, and then the trade war as well. Things went downhill. But one thing about the rhetoric, you mentioned one of the various undiplomatic things that President Trump has said about China recently. I do think that we need to keep in mind the domestic political context in the U.S. Over the last year. I do think that some of the sharper rhetoric from Trump about China was made with U.S. political considerations in mind. It's been an election year, and China is one of the few foreign policy issues that tends to be on the campaign trail all the time in U.S. elections. And I think that with the pandemic causing such havoc around the world and it causing so many problems in the United States, that for President Trump it was convenient for him to blaming China for the pandemic, calling it the China virus and all that, because he figured that could rally his base. And likewise, the comments that he's made about China threatening U.S. jobs or stealing U.S. jobs, I think that he was making that, at least in part, with the election in mind. I think that's an important initial issue to put out there. In terms of Biden, this is someone. My sense is that there is not a consensus within his campaign team as to what the appropriate policy toward China should be. And my sense is that there's some that feel he should take a harder line, some that feel he should take a softer line. But what we do know to this point is that a President Biden would continue to view China as a strategic rival, strategic competitor, and indeed a strategic threat, particularly in terms of economics and how it threatens U.S. economic primacy. I think that's quite clear. As has been mentioned several times, there's bipartisan support in Washington for this idea that China constitutes a major U.S. challenge and arguably its most significant foreign policy challenge. So if there were to be a President Biden, the U.S. would continue to look at China as the big issue, the issue that would be foremost in just about any U.S. foreign policy considerations about anything else. And certainly in terms of how Biden would look at the relationship with India, China would loom large. And for a number of years, there have been two key interests with strong bipartisan support that have fueled the growth in U.S.-India relations. One has been countering terrorism, and the other has been counterbalancing China. And now with a number of victories against Islamist terror around the world, I think that that first interest of countering terrorism is still there, but it's not as salient as the China one. That continues to be there. So I think it's very clear to me that China would continue to be a major concern for a Biden administration. Where Biden is different, or where he would be different from Trump, is that he has indicated a very strong desire to try to pursue areas of cooperation with China where they exist. And Biden wrote an essay in Foreign Affairs published earlier this year in which he was very specific about the areas that he thought were worthy of exploring cooperation with China. He mentioned climate change. He mentioned non-proliferation, which is interesting. And he also mentioned global health security. And I think that that's something that we could certainly see. If we had a President Biden, there would be there would not be as sharp of an edge to the rhetoric on China for sure. There would be more of an effort to reach out and to engage. But certainly it would be impossible for a President Biden to ignore the increasing threat that China poses to U.S. interests, particularly in terms of the activities that we all know about so well, how it's become increasingly aggressive in the South China Sea, the things that it's been saying and doing with Hong Kong and Taiwan, and of course what happened in Ladakh over the last few months. So I do think that China will continue to be a major factor in a Biden administration's foreign policy. And as well as it would also be a considerable factor in how a Biden administration would look at the relationship with India. So I don't think we should overstate this idea of Biden taking a drastically different approach to China. And I know that many Republicans have claimed that he would be soft on China and so on. I don't think that's true at all. And he's made that very clear. He has described China as a threat. He's raised a lot of concerns about human rights issues, which is not a surprise given that he wants to focus this issue of democratic values. So I think those are important things to keep in mind. For me, just to add one or two more points, I think that if you want to talk about differences between a Biden or a Trump, I agree with what's been said before. I don't think we should underestimate the issue of a potential Biden being willing to call out India on the human rights issue, whether in Kashmir or beyond. Biden has made this notion of restoring and strengthening democracy one of his major campaign themes in his foreign policy. It's almost like he's trying to have some type of throwback to the early 1990s when you had this democracy promotion movement that emerged after the Cold War. It's been a long time since I've heard a US president or presidential candidate make those types of strong comments about democracy. So that suggests to me that a Biden administration would not hold back. It certainly would be kept in check, because clearly a Biden administration would want to keep its eye on the strategic prize, and that is to pursue deeper partnership with India. And in that regard, there would be a desire to mute criticism from the administration. Now, certainly you could continue to hear criticism from select Democrats on Capitol Hill. That would be nothing new, but that's very different from coming within the administration. I think that Biden's position on Iran would be highly significant and would have considerable implications for India. I think that if there's one thing you could predict about a Biden administration, is that it would most likely try to get back into the Iran deal. I think there's a strong chance that would happen, and I think that would clearly have very positive implications for India, given how important India views Iran as a commercial partner, looking at energy trade in the past, looking at these hopes to partner with Iran on initiatives like the Chabahar port project and all that. So I think that would be a big difference. And if you want to ask the question of, well, who would be better for India, Trump or Biden, they would both be fine. This election will be a win-win for India. But if you want to look at a specific issue, I do think that the Iran policy from Biden would suggest to me that that would be a big advantage for India. Style is another major difference. We all know this, that Biden, he has his quirks, but he is conventional, he's predictable as far as US presidents go, whereas Trump is so mercurial. And given the importance of the US-India relationship, and given the clear desire in New Delhi to continue to build on the momentum that's been there over the last few years, I would think that perhaps there would be a stronger comfort level to have a more steady hand, so to speak, a more conventional, less mercurial leader in the White House. Indeed, Trump has gotten along very well with your prime minister, as I understand it, but I do think that having a more conventional leader would be preferable. Final point, what I see as one of the challenges for a Biden administration, or a Trump administration for that matter, when it comes to the US-India relationship, and I'll end here, is how to frame this fast-growing security partnership between the US and India, and specifically how to build out this US-India security partnership outside of the alliance system that the US tends to prefer be used for its closest defense partnerships, but that India, of course, has indicated that it would still like to avoid, emphasizing this notion of strategic autonomy. So I think, in other words, there'll be a need for the next administration to decide, how do you find a balance between alliance and alignments? Because clearly we know this relationship, particularly in the aftermath of the Ladakh crisis, the US-India relationship is definitely going to move forward. There's no doubt about that. All of these foundational agreements have now been concluded. But the question from there becomes, what's next? I mean, it seems to be moving toward what the US would traditionally see as an alliance, but we know that from the Indian side, that's not how New Delhi would like to see it. So how would this relationship look? Would you designate it as a soft alliance? Would it be something else? So I think that's a very interesting challenge that will have to be worked out, certainly for a Biden administration, but also for a Trump one too. Thank you.
All right, Michael, thanks. You packed in so many ideas and very, also very positive, And you're right that we can probably do with less flamboyance and mercurial behavior in the White House. Probably Joe Biden will be a little boring, but he'll be a safe customer to deal with. Anyway, we'll come back to some of these issues raised by you. Now I come to our last speaker in the first round, Dr. Harinder Sekhon. He is a strategic analyst specializing in India-United States relations. He served as a consultant at the Vivekananda International Foundation and earlier as a researcher at ORF, two of the very important think tanks in India. And she's one of the few scholars who has really done in-depth scholarly work specifically on India-United States relations. She has authored 3 books, including 5 decades of India-US relations, strategic and intellectual. India and the United States, breakthroughs, prospects, and challenges ahead. Now I turn to Harinder, which is a subject on which she's written quite a bit, which is about the Indo-Pacific and Quad. You know, under Trump presidency, we saw Indo-Pacific kind of moving to the center stage of American foreign policy, and also a very vital component of the growing India-US strategic partnership. The Quad was revived in 2017 under Trump's watch, and also held 2 ministerial meetings. One was last year in New York, which was on the sidelines of the UNG, and one recently in Japan. We also had 2+2 dialogues. Now, looking ahead to the Biden presidency, do you think the United States, Washington commitment to the Indo-Pacific theater will remain undiluted? Will it be scaled up further? Because I think Michael was right that, you know, this whole talk about softening, US softening toward China may not be accurate, because just as there is bipartisan consensus for stronger India-China relations, there is probably bipartisan consensus for curbing Chinese influence. So how do you look at this, and what are its implications for India? The Indo-Pacific and the Quad, what is the way forward?
Thank you so much, Manish, for having me on this panel. And it's not very easy being the last speaker after such a distinguished list of speakers, but I'll attempt to answer your questions. Coming to the Indo-Pacific straight away, I would say I would actually go back to what Ambassador Sibal has already said, that a lot of the groundwork for the Indo-Pacific strategy as it has evolved happened during Barack Obama's presidency. And it all started off with Hillary Clinton's famous Foreign Affairs article, where she drew America's attention to the Asia Pacific, as it was called at that time. In fact, she mentioned about East Asia and about China's rise, which could become a threat to US interests in this part of the world. So that is how I think what we saw was the evolution of the US pivot strategy, the US pivot to Asia. And President Obama came up with a joint strategic vision for the Asia Pacific. And then during his visit to India, his last visit to India in 2015, he talked about India and the United States, and India being a part, as being the defining partnership for the 21st century. So we saw a gradual evolution of US priorities in the Indo-Pacific, and India as a key player, as a leading part of the US system, where India would be able to take an active interest in the Indo-Pacific region. Having said that, I would also like to say that whatever you see in the US-India relations today, it's not just started with President Obama, but I think George W. Bush, the nuclear deal, these are all, like India's growing importance in US strategic calculus should not be underestimated, and it should be given. So, as was said earlier, there is bipartisan support and bipartisan consensus as far as the US policy towards India is concerned. Joe Biden is not an unknown entity. He has been chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee before he became vice president. And even in his campaign, during his campaign, he has talked at length about what their foreign policy priorities of his administration, if elected, would be. And what he's talked about is restoring America's role on the world stage, rebuilding our alliances, and rallying the world to confront our common challenges, including climate change. So, no doubt, his focus is a lot on climate change. But what you're going to witness is a rise to multilateralism. Trump had walked out from a lot of these US alliances, and this had caused a lot of concern, especially with their allies in East Asia, namely Japan and South Korea. He wanted them to bring more to the table and pay more to station US troops on their territory for the protection against China. So what Biden hopefully would do is that it would be a more benign, and it would be activating and enhancing the system of alliances, which was started during the time of Obama. And the other thing I see is, Biden and Obama, during the first Obama administration, Obama was rather soft, and at that time there was also talk of a G2 with China. And when Obama visited China in 2009, it was a very different Obama from what he was when he left office. And at that time, there was hope that China and the United States could work together to reshape the global economic order. And Biden, in his campaign speeches, has said that the world has changed in the last 4 years of Trump administration. China has become more aggressive and more assertive. So that is an indicator of what the Biden policy would be. He's also said, Biden has also said that he would pursue an extension of the New START treaty with Russia. And this is where, India's challenges more than US, India, and China is also going to be how we are going to manage US, India, and Russia, our other strategic partner. Russia has always been an important strategic partner. And one of the challenges I fear India would need to go over is there's been this constant threat of Katsa. But we were able to weather and overcome that during Trump administration. Would the Biden administration be more benign and look the other way as we kind of build stronger bridges both with the United States militarily, and also, since we're dependent on our military hardware, up to 60 to 70% still is the erstwhile Soviet platforms. So this is going to be the real challenge, not just for India, but also in the Indo-Pacific, and how Russia looks at India's engagement in the Indo-Pacific. But having said that, Biden is going to focus on, of course, his focus on the South China Sea is not going to go down. And also, he has been, as a candidate for the US presidential elections, he was one of the first people to congratulate Taiwan's newly elected president on her election victory and urged for stronger US-Taiwan relations. But here again, the challenge he's going to confront is that despite the importance of Taiwan in even Obama's administration, they did not sell high-end military equipment to Taiwan. And this is a policy challenge which Biden is going to face. And the importance of Taiwan is because of how China plays by the, will China play by the rules, and what is its policy going to be towards Taiwan, towards Hong Kong, and towards the other Quad partners. The US has done very well during Trump's time. In 2017, the US national security strategy went a step ahead, which no other national security strategy had done. They actually named Russia and China as revisionist powers. The Indo-Pacific got a great deal of eyeballs, this whole strategy, and also the renaming of Asia-Pacific and East Asia as Indo-Pacific is something which has happened and gained traction during the 4 years of the Trump administration. The national security strategy was followed by the US National Defense Strategy, which was released by the Pentagon in January 2018. Now, these two documents became the defining documents which kind of became the benchmark of Trump's strategy for the Indo-Pacific. And what we saw was the strengthening of the Quad mechanism and a total commitment to strengthen the Quad and take it to the ministerial level. And what we witnessed is, the 2+2 dialogue mechanism, the signing of the 3 foundational agreements, which completes, US-India strategic cooperation at one level, the technology sharing, technology, not just sharing, and also greater interoperability. The Malabar exercises are going on right now. So all this shows that there is a great deal of synergy in US and Indian views as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned. And of course, we know that it is China and China's assertive behavior. Now, would a Biden administration be able to sustain this momentum? Looking ahead, it's logical to conclude, not conclude really, it's just an observation, that I don't see that US is going to withdraw any time from this region. The US is here to stay, and there is a continuity in US policy, not only towards India, but even towards its other partners and allies. And Biden has said that he is going to strengthen the alliance with and relations with ASEAN, which is an important aspect. And it's not going to be just economic, it's also going to be strategic. So I think the US under a Biden administration is committed to stay in the Indo-Pacific. It has started during, it started with in 2007 when Shinzo Abe made his famous speech on the confluence of the two seas. And it is not the US alone which has been able to, it's not Trump alone who's been able to get such high traction for the Indo-Pacific and India. It is India itself. I think there is a maturity in our own policy in the last 4 or 5 years of the present government, where we have become more assertive in articulating our interests. And this whole pivot to Asia evolving into the Quad getting a higher trajectory and moving to the ministerial level, the 2+2, India has also shed a lot of its reticence, which has, including the signing of the BECA a fortnight ago. So I think there is a great desire both within India and the United States to continue to build upon this relationship. The China factor is a real danger for both our democracies. So I see, I feel that it's going to be an upward trajectory. We have allowed Australia to come in and complete the Quad exercises, join the Malabar exercise. So we have actually shed a lot of our reticence, and that is a good thing. And of course, the COVID is a challenge, and how India is going to, as Dr. Aghi had touched upon it, how we are able to sustain our economic growth and economic momentum. That is going to be one of the key drivers in US-India relations, because mercurial or not, I think a lot of the strategic and economic relations have to move in sync. It cannot be one at the cost of the other. And if you can create these synergies and you can create these commonalities of interest, only then we can see greater, and Biden is the one who talked about the 500 billion trade relations between India and the United States. So I think he's going to try and work a way out. And what difference we see between Trump and Biden is, as I think Michael has already said, I told you it's very tough being the last speaker. We'll find greater continuity and stability in this relationship. Trump has taken US-India relations to a new high, no doubt. We have grabbed eyeballs, but Trump 2.0 may not have been so amenable as well, because he would also have been faced with this real challenge of rebuilding US economic the economy post-COVID, and to create jobs, to rebuild the economy, to bring manufacturing back to the United States. And India and the United States, as being, we are dependent, more than 50% of our GDP is dependent on external relations, on external trade. So we cannot overlook that aspect of our relations, with the United States. So I feel that we are in a comfortable trajectory, and Biden is going to bring the stability. He's going to avoid the pitfalls of the first Obama administration. He knows India. So on the strategic defense, Indo-Pacific front, we are comfortable. Thank you.
You're still muted, Manish.
Thank you for that very optimistic presentation about India-US relations moving on to a higher trajectory in Indo-Pacific, coordinating possibly in most areas under the presidency of Biden. Some of these issues will be discussed in the form of Q&A later. So I'm glad that we've been able to wind up the first round in fairly decent amount of time. Now I come to some questions which I have received from the audience. And my first question goes to Ambassador Sibal, which is this: that this is from Mayank Chaya, who is a broadcaster, author, and also his organization Bharat FM is also our media partner in today's webinar. That from the standpoint of a section of Indo-Americans, how do you look at their apprehensions about Biden's views on Kashmir and human rights? And another question from the same gentleman, Mayank Chaya. This is for Ambassador Meera Shankar, that how the rise of Kamala Harris as Vice President will impact the Indian community. First to Ambassador Sibal. We can't hear you.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
I'm not. I'm unmuted. No. Yeah, I said.
Yeah, you are unmuted. Did you hear my question? Did you hear my question?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, I did.
Okay, all right. Over to you, sir. Now,
if Biden and the Democrats decide to raise the human rights issue, they'll be on a bit of a weak wicket, because the image of US democracy has been quite badly tarnished by this election. It's a contested election, and if it goes into legal wrangles, it will be to the embarrassment of the United States, because the promotion of democracy has been a very big element in US foreign policy. And whenever there have been elections in other countries and procedures have been followed, or elections have been rigged, or leaders hold on to power, even though the public doesn't want them to be, so the America is right there to criticize, to question, to guide, to bully, to whatever. So, so I think there is a need for United States to clean up its own democracy a little more before they lecture others. The other is the human rights thing. I recall during Obama's time how frustrated he was that he couldn't do much to protect the blacks from police violence and the racism that was growing in US society. And we now seen Black Lives Matter and this and that. All that is happening in terms of racial violence in the United States. So the United States has many virtues, but there are also many deficiencies and many warts in their own system. The second thing is that look at what the United States has done in terms of destroying regimes in the Middle East, and the Muslim regimes, I mean, Islamic regimes, for good or bad reasons, destroying whole societies, creating millions of refugees. etc., etc. So for them to raise minor issues of domestic legislation in India about CAA, or pronounce upon Delhi riots and this and that, this is excessive. This is excessive. The other is that when Biden was in power with Obama, what did they do about human rights in China? In fact, the relationship with China flourished, despite the fact that it was an authoritarian regime then. And the human rights issues have always been a matter of serious concern with regard to how China governs itself. But that didn't, in fact, they started talking about these human rights in China. So it's not as if Trump has been ignoring these issues. Even the democratic administrations have not done so. There should be, therefore, respect for Indian democracy. There should be genuine respect. And they should not be pushed by domestic lobbies or Kamala Harris or sections of the Indian American community there to raise these issues. Now, of course, India has faced these issues before. We know how to handle them. I don't think we will look upon such criticism in such a manner that the core of the relationship will get affected from our side. We know that this is inbuilt into the American system, and we have to deal with it, and so we deal with it. And taking up these issues and creating public opinion against, or mobilizing public opinion against it would not be to the advantage of India's approach to the United States or what we want to do with the United States. Therefore, we will continue to deal with these issues in as sober and realistic manner and explain our position and demand respect for our democracy and make the point, which is legitimate, that many of these issues, or in fact, these issues are being raised internally in India by the opposition, by the civil society, and they are the ones who have given this an international dimension. And all others outside have picked up on what the India's opposition itself and the civil society is saying. The judiciary is involved. Also, there's a redressal system. So I don't worry too much about this. It will be unpleasant. It will be a bit of a wrinkle in the relationship. But I think the broader relationship will continue on a strong.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for the reply. Over to you, Ambassador Shankar, to the reply about how Kamala Harris vice presidency will impact the Indian community. Very briefly, we have many questions. I will urge all the speakers to be very pithy and economical with expression. Go ahead.
Add a little to what Mr. Sibbal said, because during, say, my ambassadorship there, we had demonstrations in Kashmir, the stone throwing demonstrations and some firing with air guns, but the US didn't make any statements on Kashmir. They reduced the salience of the Kashmir issue in their overall dealings with India. The second point I'd make on this is that our own policy has to be flexible enough, and we have not said it's written in stone. After all, our own statements say that we are willing to restore statehood should the situation improve. So we really need to look at how we, handle the situation internally as well, which would again make the external dimension far less intrusive. So those are the 2 points I would make there. The third question was really about Kamala Harris. Well, I think it's a proud moment for the Indian American community to have a candidate of Indian American origin, part Indian American origin. Though her identity is mainly Black, she nevertheless also recognizes her Indian identity. Indeed, she was brought up by a mother who had migrated from India because her parents had divorced, and she was living separately from her Jamaican American father. concern has been expressed in India about some of her statements. Well, as I said, the same thing would apply, that, when you're in opposition, you can make far more, outspoken comments, whereas when you are in power, they would be moderated by your interests. What are your interests and how do they get affected if you are too outspoken on issues which may be sensitive to the other side. Thirdly, I would say that she probably will look, because her experience has been largely in the area of the administration of law and justice, criminal justice reform, and race relations, because that's where her activism has been. I think she is likely to pay more attention to these domestic issues, and foreign policy, given Joe Biden's long experience of foreign policy, is probably going to be something he handles hands-on. So how much, Kamala Harris is going to influence that remains to be seen.
Thanks. Now turning to Mr. Agi, you have a question, sir, from Mr. Rao Madhukuri from Poland. He is also a Pravasi Bharati Samman awardee. He's got economic question, which is this, that the changing international order and protectionism enabled India to become an economic powerhouse by partnering with the US like China did in the last 40 years. Just to add a bit to this, which Harinder Sekhon referred to as, the target which we keep setting of $500 billion, which remains elusive as ever. Do you think we'll ever get there? You have 3 minutes, sir, to respond.
Well, it's hard to predict because you have to understand there's a shift in the economic momentum in the US, the shift in the economic momentum in India due to COVID. And there's a shift because of China, where industries are moving a lot of their manufacturing out of China into other geographies. And one of them is India. But I strongly believe that the geopolitical alignment will percolate into economic partnership between India and the United States. You have to look at a couple of factors. One is just on generic. 40% of the US generics come from India, and they're bringing roughly $30 billion savings to the United States government itself. Now, of those 40% generics, 70% of those API comes from China. And in the case of ibuprofen and paracetamol, 100% of the API comes from China. So at the moment in the US, the focus is move that supply chain out of China, and they're fine creating dependency on India rather than China. To answer your question, I think, will India, US reach a $500 billion target? Eventually they will. It is hard to predict because, last year the trade grew between the two countries about 5%. But what's interesting is the energy trade has been growing almost 200% on an annual basis itself. And if we open up more H-1B workers, so India's IT services exports will go up dramatically. Under Biden, we believe he'll be much more liberal on H-1B issues itself. So I would say the momentum is in the right direction. It will accelerate under Biden administration. And as China gets more and more inward-looking, US companies will focus more on India and try to basically create more jobs, manufacturing, innovation, and further trade. So I would say, yes, we will reach there one day. I don't have a time period for that.
All right. Okay. I have two questions for Michael Kugelman. One is from Vijay Nair, a journalist. He asked, do you see the possibility of the US restoring relations with Cuba during the Biden tenure? And the second question is from Rushali Saha, who is a research associate, a writer who works with us. And her question is, what effect the deepening of ties will have on South Asia's balance of power? What we saw in towards the end of the Trump tenure was the Mike Pompeo's visit to Maldives, Sri Lanka, and it signaled US strategic intent to deepen its footprint in South Asia as a probable counter to China's growing profile there. How do you look at that? Please note we are running out of time now, so 3-4 minutes max.
Thank you, and I won't even take up that much time. It's hard for me to say, in the first question with Cuba, it's hard for me to say. I don't really follow that issue all that closely, though. If we look at the record during the Obama years, that suggests that a President Biden would be inclined to want to figure out ways to make that relationship work a little bit better. On the second issue, I think this is an area of continuity. Dr. Harinder spoke about the Indo-Pacific policy and how that's evolved over the years. I really think that a President Biden would be just as committed to that idea, even if a new name is used for it, than President Trump has. The Indo-Pacific policy, Trump's Indo-Pacific policy, is meant at the end of the day to draw together like-minded nations in the broader region to try to counterbalance China. And I don't see how a President Biden would disagree with that. And I think the outreach that was alluded to by Secretary of State Pompeo going to Maldives, Sri Lanka, trying to impress upon these countries this notion that the U.S. is behind them, and perhaps also to suggest that they wean themselves off of China. I don't think that's something at odds with what a President Biden would want to do. I mean, as I had said before, as we've noted, this is someone that would certainly want to pursue cooperation with China where he could, but not when it comes to strategic issues, security issues. But the U.S. has treaty allies in the region, South Korea, Japan. It really worries about what threat China poses to those treaty allies through its increasingly aggressive activities in the South China Sea. And I do think that a Biden administration, like the Trump administration, would view these South Asian countries as within the scope of the Indo-Pacific, geographically speaking. Matt Pottinger, a senior Trump administration official earlier this year, famously said that he sees the Indo-Pacific stretching from California to Kilimanjaro, suggesting that South Asia is a part of that policy. I don't see why Biden would disagree with that. So to answer your question, I think that we would see continuity with this outreach that Pompeo and the administration have made to try to bring these countries on board with the U.S. And I think Biden would be at an advantage because there's been so much concerns within many of these key capitals about U.S. intentions, because the Trump administration has indicated that it wants to withdraw, not engage, and a President Biden would send the opposite message.
Thank you. The next question is for Harinder Sekhon, which is from Sneha Sanghvi from Mumbai. She asked that, during Trump presidency, we saw 3 editions of 2+2 dialogue. And this architecture, this 2+2 formula was also, rejigged during his tenure, the foreign minister and the defense minister. Do you see this being continued? 2+2 will continue under the Biden tenure, or will he come out with his own spin, his own formula for advancing strategic ties?
Like the 2+2 is is the result of a natural evolution in US-India relations. And it started with John Kerry. I remember that John Kerry in 2014, he mooted the idea of a 2+2 and also facilitated an India-Japan-US trilateral dialogue. So 2+2 had come on the radar at that time. And so now once a mechanism is institutionalized or it becomes regular, it does not, because US policy is actually run by professionals, and the change of leadership does not change the underlying policy as such. So I feel not just the 2+2 mechanism, but the commitment to take US-India relations from one level to the next will continue irrespective of who is the next president.
Manish, if I may just add here, the 2+2 proposal was originally mooted by Hillary Clinton, and he wanted to come with Robert Gates in a 2+2 format. When I was there, the Indian side had some concerns about the format. Now both have agreed to the format, so I don't see any problems in its continuance in future.
All right. That's a great news that there will be institutional continuity. Now, Dr. Mukesh Aghi, this is my question. I'm just wondering that during Trump presidency, there was so much focus on optics, in terms of, how the state visits were orchestrated and all that hug diplomacy and, those generous hugs between the two leaders, the touch of flamboyance and all that. You probably known him or interacted with him. What is your sense? What will be Biden's style of diplomacy?
He's very congenial as a person. He has a very congenial, friendly, conciliatory style. And he's a politician who has worked for many years in the Senate across the aisle, not just with his own party, but also, shaping consensus across the aisle. So these are political skills of a traditional kind, which will stand him in good stead when he seeks to, expand American influence and credibility in the world.
Right. Dr. Aghi, would you like to add something to that?
He is a consensus builder. And in my statement, I mentioned earlier, his relationship with Mitch McConnell, leader of the Senate, is better than Mitch McConnell's relationship with President Trump. So I strongly believe, and it's very interesting how the markets reacted yesterday, went up by 600 points, because they see an early deal making on stimulus between the Senate and the White House with President Biden coming in. So that will percolate down on a global basis. He will build consensus with the European Union, with the NATO. I wouldn't be surprised if he revived the TPP. So I think you will see a much more multilateral consensus-based approach rather than a transactional approach here.
Right. Dr. Sibbal, there is a question for you, which is essentially about India, US-Russia ties. Trump really wanted to turn around and often express the wish, but Russia got caught in a major entangled in a major controversy about its alleged role in manipulating social media and all that. Do you see a new period? Do you see a new dawn for US-Russia relations under the Biden presidency? Because it clearly means good news for India, if that were to happen. Please unmute, sir. You have to unmute. Yeah.
I'm unmuting myself. I don't think Biden will be at all soft on Russia. In fact, Obama treated Russia with a great deal of contempt, if you recall, calling it a regional power, and rubbing their nose in that you're no longer equal to the United States. Now, Russia became a very, very big issue in domestically in the United States in terms of internal politics and elections and Trump's election. And the Democrats have been hammering away at that. I think Biden wants to normalize ties with the European Union, with Europe by and large, which means that he will be more sensitive to what the Baltic states and Poland and other countries feel about Russia. You'll also give some comfort to the NATO alliance, which will also then preclude reaching out to Russia. And since Russia, as has been mentioned earlier in strategic documents issued by the United States, has been mentioned as an adversary along with China of the United States, that's not going to change. On CAATSA, Trump's heart was not in it, but the Congress is very much behind it. I can't see how Biden will be able to reverse that legislation. It is different. He may not apply that legislation fully. I think the test will come when the S-400 issue comes on the annual. When Russia starts making deliveries of the S-400, then we see how Biden reacts to this. So all said and done, I don't think that we'll get much relief insofar as Biden is concerned in our relations with Russia. And if the US trust remains to become our principal defense partner, as they've been saying, which means replace Russia in our defense, external defense ties, then the pressure to create complications in our relation with Russia will continue, and Russia will not also reach out to the United States in any significant way. I mean, Putin has made his strategic choices for the moment. Unless Biden and the US establishment reaches out to Russia in order to balance China, which is not going to happen, Putin will have no interest to send the wrong signals to China and lose at both hands. So to answer your question, I think we'll continue to have difficulties in dealing with America.
The next question is for Harinder, which is about how do you see the possibility of expansion of Quad? This is from Vijay Nayak once again. Very briefly, I think we got to wind this up maximum in 5:10. We can go on endlessly, but somewhere we have to stop. Okay, go ahead.
The Quad is going to, I think, if you go by the interest which has been shown by some of the EU countries, especially France and Germany. And France has been partnering with India in sailing in the Indian Ocean and trying to play a bigger role. The European countries also are looking at a bigger role in the Indo-Pacific. So I think a logical expansion of the Quad as observers, because right now the 4 Quad countries do not want any expansion of the Quad specifically because the Quad then loses its meaning. Quad means 4 countries. But what has been mooted and what is likely to happen is a Quad plus kind of a mechanism where the Quad countries invite the other East Asian countries as observers and as partners in the Quad dialogue. But this is still a work in progress because the Quad itself is not, has not been able to chart out any agenda for itself, except that they have to, a major step has been the quadrilateral maritime Malabar exercise, which is currently underway. So I think it's going to be a loose arrangement, but definitely I see a Vietnam and some of the other East Asian countries, maybe a Philippines, Singapore, being invited as observers and being called in to give their inputs. But Europe definitely is going to be more actively involved.
All right. Dr. Agi, briefly, our audience, quite a few questions I got on this theme, which is about the possibility of a US-China trade deal and what would be its ramification for India? What would it mean for India? Very briefly. I know it demands a complex response here.
Regardless of trade deal, not trade deal between US and China, in the boardroom in the US, there is a consensus that you got to have a China plus one strategy. And that means while you maintain your market share in China, keep on looking at alternative areas to manufacture and go after those markets. And India does provide that. At the moment, the momentum seems to be in the favor of Vietnam and other geographies, but we're seeing momentum picking up in India. Classic example is Apple. Apple 2 years ago did not manufacture any phones in India. And at the end of 2019, they were manufacturing 200,000 phones a month in India. And now that production has been raised to 400,000 a month. In fact, if you look at the Series 11, 3.2 million of those phones were exported from India to the rest of the world. So I think deal or no deal with China, India's momentum is there. It'll continue. And you have to understand this Prime Minister has taken the lead in providing investment, better tax policies, and trying to improve the working ease of doing business. We have some way to go, but at least the momentum is there, and you will see US companies focusing more and more on India.
All right. Thank you so much. I had a couple of questions for Michael, but he's probably not around right now. Anyway, thank you so much to all of you. I mean, we can go on for maybe a couple of hours more, but I think we should stop here. It is my now pleasant duty to perform a vote of thanks and some last concluding remarks. I think we had this really outstanding power-packed panel. People who had decades of experience dealing with the United States, who are familiar, who are on the inside track of the way things are shaping or will shape in the future. obviously, none of us are crystal ball gauges. We don't know what lies in the womb of the future, so to speak. But what has emerged from this 1.5 hour, 90 minutes plus discussion is a very positive, reassuring sense that there is only one way for India-United States relations to go, that is up and up. And this bipartisan consensus is not just feel-good rhetorical spin, but it's for real. So we can expect that the momentum that was generated during Trump presidency and his predecessors will not only be sustained, but we hope that it will be taken to new heights. Now, just the last bit, which is about, okay, we are taking probably a narrow view of India-US relations, that we are talking, it cannot be segregated or delinked from America's position in the world. Just 1 second, please. I'm really sorry about this. There was some electricity issue. Yeah, I was saying that, this discussion on India-US relations focused on is all very well, but we cannot delink it from the larger picture about America's fate, America's image in the post-pandemic world. Like it or not, pandemic has uh, diminished the way America handled, the way President Trump handled pandemic has diminished the allure of the American dream. Uh, President Trump's flamboyance and mercurial behavior also stirred a lot of unpredictability in world capitals about what America will do on key. America's soft power and his global image, some would say, has really sunk low. I'm not quite sure how much that is true, but yes, there is some truth to that. So now the real question is that Biden, the thinker, the Biden, the statesman-like figure, uh, Biden, the skillful negotiator, and the man who's got the personal touch will be able to restore brand America. I think to sustain the popular constituency, which we have, a very large constituency for stronger and better India-United States relations, that's very important uh, that the American dream regains its potency and power. I just conclude with this famous poem by Langston Hughes, which is, "Let America be America again," which is this, that let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain, seeking a home where he himself is free. Let America be the dream the dreamers dreamed. Let it be that strong land of love, where never kings connive nor tyrants scheme, that any man be crushed by one above. So I think this American dream, the potency of the American dream, and the way Indian dream and American dream can intertwine on a deeper level, that's where the future of India-America relations lies. I would like to thank from my heart very distinguished speakers, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, who has been a sturdy pillar of support for all our activities, Dr. Mukesh Aggi, who accepted my invitation on a short notice, Ambassador Meera Shankar, Harinder Sekhon, all of them for enriching this discussion with their insights, experience, and expertise. Till the next time, and make goodbye to you, and let's hope that making India great and making America great dovetail. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our audience, which is watching this from multiple channels, and we got some very positive response. So we hope to build on this, and when there is more stability in who's going to be the next president finally, officially, probably we'll hold some other webinar on a different theme. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Thanks.